Hello, and welcome back to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we are once again at it with perfecting page layout. Today we're going to be looking at the page itself and the size of the page, meaning, letter size or legal size or whatever, but also the page margins. And so we're going to try and cover all of this today, which is a bit much, but we'll see if we can get through it. So let's start with the page size, which again is the literal size of the whole page. And in this file, you can see, or maybe you can't quite see it, but this is a legal size paper that this score is set up on. And I'm going to go into the page layout tool, and what we're going to be dealing with for page size is this option all the way down here called page size. Now, with many of the things in the page layout menu here, you do have to be aware of this option here, update page format for score. What this will do is it will take any change that you make below that here in these options for systems and page margins and page size, etc., and import that into the page layout, the page format for the score. Now, this is only available for the score, by the way. If you're in a part, this option doesn't exist, so you can't make changes to an individual part like this and have it transfer over to the part format for the parts. You can only do that for the score. So just be conscious of whether or not this is checked, and I'm going to talk about this more as we go. But for now, I'm going to leave it unchecked, and we're talking about page size. So let's go in here and see what we have. There's a few options here. It's a fairly simple window. And so what you're looking at is this pull-down menu that has a bunch of preset page sizes that Finale can give you out of the box. And currently I have this set to legal, which is 8.5 by 14 inches, but you can change it to letter, tabloid. There's some A5, B5, A4 options for the Europeans. We have these statement sizes, hymn sizes. Statement, I think, is just half of a letter size. Hymn, octavo, these are some other specialty page sizes that are somewhat common. Folio, including concert, which is 9 by 12, which is a common size for parts. And then there's a custom option here. Now, choosing the custom option won't do anything initially. There's no other window that pops up. But when you have custom options selected here, then basically you can set any width and height that you want. In fact, you don't even have to select that from the pull-down menu. If you start making changes here to the width, you'll see that it switches right away to custom. So I have done some work where the pages were actually 9.5 by 12.5, which isn't a standard size according to Finale, but you can simply type in that width and height and create yourself a custom size. So that's how you do that. So now let's just go back to legal. And of course, we do have the option for the orientation, portrait being taller than it is wider. Landscape would do it the other way. So now you're saying the width is 14 and the height is 8.5. So now, incidentally, you'll notice that this is all in inches, 8.5 by 14 here. We can change this to a different value, but you have to go into the Finale preferences here, into the edit menu, and there's a measurement units thing here. So if we wanted to see this in centimeters, just choose the centimeters here, and then we can go back into the page size. And now all of a sudden you'll see that legal is 21.59 centimeters by 35.56, and it will list all of these paper options in centimeters instead. But that's the only way to do that. You have to go into the edit menu to choose the appropriate measurement unit, but I'm going to go back to inches for now. And let's look at that again. So the second half of this window is where some of the magic happens as well. It will ask you what you would like to change. And in most cases, current part or score will be selected automatically. Actually, it will always be selected automatically at first. And what that means is that you're only going to make changes to the part or score that you're currently viewing. There's other options here, like you can change all of the parts, you can change all of the parts and the score together, or selected parts and score. And if you choose the second option, you get the select button, which will allow you to go through and check off any score or part that you want to make the change to. So there's a ton of flexibility and customability just in terms of where you're making the change. Now, with a score, you can only have one score in a Finale, so if you're making a change to the score, you probably want to use current part or score. However, if you are going to make a change to the parts, if you were to do current part or score on the flute 1 part here, then all you would be changing is the flute 1. So in this case, it might make more sense to choose all parts. Or if you're doing something specialized where, say, all the parts need to be on 9 by 12, except for maybe the piano part. What you can do is select them all and then just deselect piano, which I have already done here, I guess. And so what this would allow me to do is change all of the parts to 9 by 12, except for that piano part, which we're going to leave in letter size. So there's some nifty options going on with just this little pull-down menu. So just be aware of what it is that you're changing before you make that change. And below that, we have even more finite control. We can choose which pages within the current part or score, the selected part or score, all parts or all parts and scores, which pages of those things we want to affect. Now, most of the time, you're going to choose all pages because you probably want to make a page size change to all pages, but you can choose to change the size of a single page if you want. You can choose to change the size of just the left pages, just the right pages, or any page range. So for some reason, if you wanted to change the score to letter size just for pages 1 through 3, this is how you would set it up. And you'd click OK. And after a second, you'll see that pages 1 through 3 are now on letter size. Of course, this is disastrous for this particular score because the size of the score does not fit on letter size. But then after that, pages 4 and going forward, it remains on legal size. So that's what's sort of going on there. And remember, this whole time I have this update page format for score unchecked. So all of these changes that I'm making are not going to be reflected in the page format. And as we know from previous videos, when you don't change the page format, what that means is that the new pages generated going forward will not match the old pages that you just changed. They will consult whatever settings you have in the page format for the page size. Of course, we can do this the backwards way, or I guess maybe this is the right way to do it. I guess it's just up to you depending on how you want to think about it. We can go into the page format for score to ensure that the default will always be the same. So now, for example, I can change my format for the score to tabloid and click OK. And again, remember, when we do this from the page format for score, nothing happens because this will only affect pages being generated from this point forward. All the existing pages are still defined in the old page format. Of course, we get around this by redefining pages from the page layout menu. And again, we choose all pages of current part score most of the time, but again, you have the options to redefine only the left, the right, or the current page that you're viewing, which is actually this page down here, or selected pages if we want. So let's just choose all pages of current part score. And what this is going to do after the warning, are you sure you want to redefine the specified pages? Yes, I do. Again, what this will do is it will redefine the pages to match the settings in the page format. So now I reset this all to tabloid, and you can see that everything changed to tabloid. Again, doing it backwards or the other way, go to page size. Oops, you know what? Let's do it this way. So this time I'm going to update page format for score. I'm going to leave that option checked, right? So now when I make a page size change, let's go back to legal. And all pages, current part or score, correct. Click OK. Now it's going to, there we go, change all of these pages back to legal size. And because I had this option checked here, the page format in the score will now be updated to legal size. So again, just a bunch of different options about how to do that. Just be aware of what you're doing. Now, let's start talking about page margins, because this is the other part of the video I want to cover. And there's a section here in the page layout tool. First of all, I'm going to uncheck that. Page margins. We have this edit page margins, and I'm going to get to these bottom 4 options later in the video. This has to do with actually making manual changes to the handles in for the page margins themselves. But let's actually go into the edit page margin option here, and you get this little mini edit page margin window. It's a very small window, but it's exceptionally powerful, and I'm going to show you how exactly it works. First of all, just so you're aware, the page margins are these things here that, you know, they look like these thin gray lines that run vertical. There's one on the left, one on the right, and horizontal, one on the top and one on the bottom. Those are the page margins. Now, the page margins are sort of, in Finale, they're not absolute in the sense that nothing can ever cross outside of the page margin. In fact, you'll see that I have many elements that are outside of the page margin or between the page margin and the edge of the page. The page margin in Finale is more of a reference point, and that reference point is sort of important when you're dealing with text blocks, because the text blocks can either reference the page margin or the page edge. But also, it's relative to the system margins. Now, the system margins are these gray lines that run across, horizontally the top and bottom, and vertically left and right of every system. But you may notice that the system margins actually run in concert on the left side with the left edge of the bar line here, which means that some of the items, like the brackets and the names, are actually outside of the system margins. Now, the system margins generally get lined up with the page margins, although you don't have to set it up like that. So what this means is that the staff names actually go outside of the page margins. So, or if you have your system margins set up so that they're indented a little bit, maybe they won't go outside of the page margin. There's a lot of different options of how to set this up in Finale. It's sort of up to you to decide what the best way to do it is. For me, I tend to leave my system margins in line with my page margins and just make sure that my page margins are offset enough on the left side here to give myself enough room for all of these instrument names. Except for this first margin, you'll see that I've changed the system margin to be a little bit offset from the page margin, which only lets my names hang over a little bit. Again, this will be fine for printing. There's plenty of space there. And so let's go ahead and look at this little Edit Page Margins mini window, which is super powerful despite its little size. Now, this Edit Page Margin window, if it's not there, it's simple to pull up. Just choose Page Margin, Edit Page Margins, and it will always appear. And let's see what's going on here. So we have top, left, right, and bottom margins, top, left, right, bottom margins, and those are the values, 0.5, 0.5. And you notice that they're always positive numbers, so the margins are positive offset from whichever side they're referencing. So the top margin is 0.5 away from the top, the bottom margin is 0.5 away from the bottom, so upwards from the bottom, leftwards from the right, rightwards from the left, if that makes sense. And there's also these little check marks here next to the top, left, right, and bottom. So how this all works in concert is that when you make a change to a margin, like let's say we're going to change this right margin to 0.9 instead of 0.5, the right margin checkbox has to be checked in order for this margin change to take place. If I were to uncheck this, in fact, if I were to uncheck all of these and make changes to these boxes and with change all pages selected, try and hit apply, nothing's going to happen. The reason is that you haven't told Finale to specifically change any given margin. Now, you might be asking, why is this even an option? I'll show you that in a second. But right now, with all of these things checked, or actually with just the right one checked, you'll see that now when I hit apply, that right margin will move to the right for all pages because I have the all pages selected. All right, so let's just go back and undo that so we get back to 0.5. Now, the value of having these check boxes here, which will allow you to ignore certain margins when you make changes. Now, this can come in handy. Let's say, for example, I'm just going to change the page margin for page 1, just the top margin. I'm going to make this 1.5, which is something that you can do. Now, I have this set up where the system margin is a lot lower on the first page, but you can also set the page margin instead and then change the text blocks to go outside of the page margin, etc. But it's just not the way I have this set up. Anyway, I'm going to change just the top margin for page 1. And you'll see that the top margin gets a lot lower. Now, if I were to look at this, now I have differing top margins between page 1 and everything else. But if I wanted to make a change to the right margin of all pages, including page 1, if I had all of these selected and I did a margin change on the right-hand side, what's going to happen if I choose all pages is that it's going to also change all the other pages' top margin to 1.5, which is not what I would want to do. So what I would need to do in this instance, if I can undo that, there we go, is uncheck the top margin specifically so that it ignores the top margin when I make this change. In other words, it will leave the top margin exactly as it is on every page going forward. So now when I make this change to the right margin, and again, if I wanted to, I could ignore the top, the bottom and left margin. It will only change the right margin. So now you'll see just the right margin moved over preserving that difference between the page 1 and page 2 top margins, if that makes sense. So let's just go ahead and undo all of this. There we go. So that's the idea behind these little checkboxes. It provides an incredible amount of flexibility if you kind of know what's going on. Essentially, uncheck them if you want the change to ignore that particular margin. Now, let's look at what's going on below. I kind of indicated a little bit about this already. So this is going to be where you can change the scope of the change. So as you saw, I can change just the page 1 margin by choosing page and then select 1, or you can choose any page that you want. You can change a very specific margin on a very specific page. You can change all the margins, as you've seen, by doing this. Of course, again, ignoring certain margins. Again, there's just so many different variations of doing this, but knowing what does what is really important. There's also options for left only and right only. Now you have to realize that right and left pages is really how a book is laid out. So page 1 is always a right page, page 2 is a left page, page 3 is a right page, etc. So the odd pages are the right pages. The even pages are the left pages, all right? So just be aware of that, and this will come in handy. I'll show you a little bit more about this because you can do facing pages where the left and right margins are different for left and right pages, etc. This is how you would sort of deal with that. There's also the page range option here, so you can change page 1 through page 3, whatever margin you want, or if you want, you could change page 2 to 6, whatever margin you need to change. And then when you do have this option checked, you do have this sub option, adjust right or left only within this range. And the way this works is that if you make a change starting on page 2, which is a left page, then that page is then the adjustment's only going to be made to the left pages between pages 2 and 6, if that makes sense. So let's just illustrate this here. Again, making a right margin change to pages 2 through 6, right or left only. In this case, it's the left page. So let's see, there it is. Page 2 gets changed, 3 gets left alone, 4 gets changed, 5 gets left alone, 6 gets changed, and then 7 through the rest of the score get unchanged. So that's how that works. It's incredibly, there's an incredible amount of variability that's available in this very small window with all of these options. And then adding on top of that, when you hit the apply button here, you're really just applying this to the current part or score that you're viewing. We do have the option of applying to multiple parts or scores by selecting this option. And again, this pulls up a similar menu that you saw before where you can, check all of them, check none of them, and then select very particular parts that you want to change the margin to. Or again, change the margins to all of them except the piano or something like that. And then as soon as you hit OK, that's like hitting apply to all of these all at once. So there's even more flexibility about how you can change those margins. So again, this little mini window is just a marvel of engineering in a way, because they were able to accomplish so many different options in such a small little space. But unless you know how it works, it's not going to really do you much good. So anyway, that is pretty much how that works. Now again, with the update page format for score unchecked, all of those changes that I were making were just making overrides to the pages. So nothing I did was changing the page format for the score. However, if I had that option checked, I could get in a little bit of trouble if I'm making a lot of individual changes, because every time I make a margin change to a specific page or a part or score or whatever, it's going to try and reflect that into the page format for the score. Actually, only for the parts, because this only applies for the score. You can't actually, cross back the changes made to a part into the page format for the part, if that makes sense. So again, just be really careful about whether or not this option is checked or not. Generally, I keep this unchecked unless I know for a specific reason I need to do something that will, reflect the changes I'm making back into the page format. Speaking of the page format, let's go back in there and go to the score here. There is a section for the page margins in the page format, and it's on the bottom right here. You'll see a whole thing here. And you'll see similar numbers here for the margins, the top left, right, top, left, right, and bottom margins. Now, in the page format, we do have two options. We have left page margins and right page margins. And there's this option for facing pages. When facing pages is unchecked, you don't have the option of changing any of the right margins. Now, what this means with this unchecked is that all of the pages will take on the margins that are set here in the left margin settings, which always seems odd to me because the right margin is actually the first page, so it seemed like it would have been the other way, like they would give you access to this one, which would affect all the pages. But anyway, this is just how it works. The left page margins affect everything if this option is unchecked. With it checked, now you have options to change the right and left margins independently. This is sort of handy if you're doing things with music in binders. Sometimes you want to have the inside margins a little bit wider to make room for the hole punches, right? So this is exactly what we would do. And again, remember the left page, the hole punch is going to go on the right side of the page, so you want a larger right margin. So let me just set this up for you so you can kind of see how this will work. And I'll do this a little bit extremely. So for the left margins, we're going to do 0.5. For the right margins, we'll do 1. And then for the right page, we're going to do the opposite, 1 and 0.5. Now remember, this is the page format window. So when I click OK, nothing's going to happen, right? Until redefine pages. Again, this all works the same way for all of these options. All pages, yes. Okay, so now you can see that my right pages, which are page 1 and page 3 and everything, let's look at page 3 here, has a wider margin on the left side to leave room for the hole punches. And you can actually kind of see the layout in the Finale interface here. There's a little bit of a blue strip here, which just indicates sort of the edge of the layout, I guess it were, and there's no blue in between. So this is where my mouse is indicating is where the hole punches would go. This is the value of having that facing pages situation. Now, it won't make a lot of sense for a legal-sized score like this, but for a piano part that you want to put in a binder or something, this is exactly how you would do that. So you'd want to have the facing pages with your left and right margins slightly different for each page. But for now, let's go back and set this up the way I had it. Good to go. Yep. All right, and then there was one other option there I wanted to talk about, the first page top margin option. This will allow you, again, to set it up so that just the first page can have a special top margin. And again, we can set something like 1.5 here. And yet again, nothing happens until redefine pages. There we go. And now you can see that the first page has that special top margin, which is going to be a lot lower than the pages after that. So that's what's going on with the page format for score. And remember that when you make changes here, you always have to go and redefine pages for whichever part or score or whatever that you're dealing with, okay? Finally, I know we're getting long in the tooth on this video here, but this is just the end of the margin situation. It is possible to change the margins manually directly in page view here. In fact, every margin has these little handles that you can see here, and these can actually be dragged. So you can just drag it to the left and change the margin. What's important about knowing what to do with these is that in the page layout menu where we have the page margins section here, these bottom 4 options become very important, because whichever option is checked, when you make those changes to the page margins with the handles, that's what's going to be affected. So with adjust all pages selected here, again, I could move this margin and you'll see that I can move this margin and you'll see that it changed margin to page 2 as well as 3 and everything. So you're actually changing the left margin for all the pages. Again, we have other options. We can just change the current page. And when we do this, we can change the top margin, and you'll see we can change the top margin, and you'll see that it will just affect the top margin of the first page. So it's very important to understand the scope of the changes you're making. There's also the adjust left or right pages. Now this is critical to understand. When you do this and you change a margin from a right page, it will change all of the odd number pages. If you change a margin on a left page, it will change all of the even number pages. Come on. There we go. 2, 4, 6, 8, etc. So again, it's just important to know what the scope is, and if you and the last option here is the adjust page range. So you can actually set up if I wanted to change margin 1 or page 1 through 3, and there is an option for adjust left or right pages only. And again, with this option checked, it depends on which page you choose. So if I were to choose pages 1 through 5, adjust left or right pages only, and then move, say, the right margin on page 2, it will change the margin on page 2 and 4, and then 6 through the end, even pages, it will leave that alone. So again, a whole bunch of different options in terms of doing that. Now, I don't really recommend changing the margins with the handles here because it's fairly imprecise. Generally speaking, I find it much better to kind of deal with absolute numbers that you can kind of control a little bit better. But there are, if you're in a hurry, sometimes this can be a quick way to do it. One other thing to mention is that if you right-click one of these handles, we will actually get all 4 of those options here, so you can choose directly the scope of the changes that you want to make on this particular part. So adjust all pages, left or right, page range, current page, etc. But we also have the remove manual adjustments and the edit margins option here. Now the edit margins basically does the same. If that little mini window isn't there, it does the same as pulling it up here. When you select it there, it'll pull up, or if you right click and choose edit margins, you'll get your little edit page margins mini window. The other option here is remove manual adjustments, and this is interesting because if I were to adjust all pages, I could have checked that here, right? Adjust all pages. If I were to make a margin change here and I were to right click and remove manual adjustment, it's only going to remove the manual adjustment of that particular margin on that particular page. So it will actually ignore all of the other changes that I made. So just be aware that that using that is not as universal as actually changing the margins. And again, the same thing with this option about updating the page format for Score. If you're making these changes manually like this, with this option unchecked, you'll be fine because nothing will change in the page format. But if you happen to have this option checked and you make a move of your top margin here, that will actually reflect in the page format, and you'll see that now all of a sudden the left page margin, top margin, is now a lot higher than it was. So again, just be really careful about this update page format for Score and when you have it engaged and when you do not have it engaged. All right, so I think that covers it. That's the page size and the page margins. There's a lot to it. There's like sort of a lot of different places you can change it, and I think hopefully now you have a better understanding of when to change what where and how certain things affect other things. So hopefully this has been a big help. All right, so thanks for watching. Come back. The next video we're going to start looking at page and system scaling, I believe. Yeah, page and system scaling, and we'll look at that next. So so thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you soon on the next video.